Welcome to another season of Pro-2-Pro, where we sit down with entrepreneurs and successful business people and talk about their journeys to their success in their career. We go behind the scenes and have candid conversations with them and discuss health, relationships, fitness, and of course, business decisions, good and bad. If you're looking for inspiration, valuable business insights, and a dose of motivation, you're in the right place. Join me and my guests as we share our experiences, ideas, and stories that can help you on your own journey of growth and success. Welcome, and remember, keep it Pro-2-Pro. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Pro-2-Pro. I'm here with my friend, Dr. Amir Ahmadian. Welcome to Pro-2-Pro, Doc.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
This is great. Just before we got started, you had a call, so for our viewers and listeners, maybe we'll be able to put on a little bit of behind the scenes of what you had to deal with, because you currently are on call.
I am, yes.
That's amazing. So first, obviously I want to thank you for coming on. We've been trying to get you on for a long time now. You're extremely busy building out your empire and obviously practicing medicine. For our viewers and listeners, when they see our names, they're going to look and see, hey, wait a minute, they both have the same last name, IAN there. What is that? What is that? Is Dr. Ahmadian, is he Armenian? And I'm sure you get asked that a lot, right?
A lot, yes.
But you're actually Persian by descent,
I
right?
am, yes.
All right.
Yes.
Your partner, if I recall.
Yes.
What's his name again?
Ahmadian.
He's Armenian.
He is Armenian.
Okay.
As Armenian as they come.
Well, I'm half Italian as well. So I think sometimes I talk about I have the best of both worlds in regard to that. But welcome to the program. Is part of our discussions when we talk about different things with our guests. One of the topics we kind of segue into relate to, your personal journey to become who you are. Obviously, I know that you're a neurosurgeon, but did you one day wake up and decide, hey, I want to be a neurosurgeon? Was there any family influences that got you to where you are? Why don't you share a little bit about how you got to become a neurosurgeon?
Yeah, absolutely not. I didn't know what neurosurgery was when I was younger. I actually wanted to be an Air Force pilot. That was my first kind of love. And the reason was that my father was an Air Force pilot. He was an Air Force pilot that was trained by the United States Air Force, part of a squadron called the Tiger Squadron. And I would see that as a young person. And as I got older, that's what I wanted to do. He pretty much said I couldn't do that. So I had to pick something else.
Why? Why do you think?
I think, when he was going through that, it was a time of turmoil, war, transition in the regime back in Iran or Persia. That was his view of it, that there was going to be war, dangers, and things of that nature. And I think he was just trying to protect his kid. So I had to pick something else. And it wasn't until probably my second year in college that I gravitated to the neurosciences. I was part of the first class of a special program they had at Emory University, Oxford of Emory. It was called Neuroscience and Behavioral Biology. It was kind of I think their second or first inaugural class to major in that. That put me in the field of neurosciences. And then by the end of my second year, I started volunteering, and it's a very interesting story how I really learned about the brain. And then I got really turned on to it. My second year in college, actually maybe in my third, I started volunteering in a neuroimaging lab, where basically we mapped different aspects of the brain. There was the functional MRI was out. Everyone was using it to determine which part of the brain controls anything. And my project was mirror neurons. This is a particular subset of neurons in the brain that mirror what you see someone else doing. For example, when you move your right hand, there are a certain subset of neurons in my brain that function like I'm moving my right hand, but I am not. And we were trying to leverage that into stroke patients who have a paralyzed right hand. We would take video of them, flip the video so it looks like they're moving the paralyzed hand, and they would watch those videos, trying to stimulate those mirror neurons, to stimulate actual somatic neurons, to improve in their health. That was my project. I thought it was a fascinating project. And one day, the neurosurgeon at Emory University, which I had no idea, I didn't know him, they came to the lab and said, hey, we need your help. There's a patient in the hospital who has rectal pain that we can control. And we were wondering if you can map the brain to this patient's rectal area. And I apologize to the viewers, but that was the actual consult that came to us, and we were kind of confused by it initially. But this gentleman was a paraplegic, or actually quadriplegic. He was paralyzed really from chest down, but he had so much pain in the rectal area. So we did that. We put that patient in a functional MRI machine, and we had them imagine if they were bearing down, for example. And then me and the PhD in the office, we mapped it to a certain part of the brain. The PhD has no interest in the clinical side. So he said, okay, we'll map it. The neurosurgeon said the surgery's Tuesday at 8 a.m. Come on in and let us know where we're going to put the stimulator. And that concept is you stimulate that area to hopefully relieve the sensation of pain. So that Tuesday morning, we mapped it. The PhD asked me, did you map it? I'm like, yeah, it's this area of the brain's area, probably less than an inch in square. And we put it on a jump drive, old school jump drive. He told me he doesn't even know where the OR is. Why don't you just go ahead up there and give him this thumb drive? So I show up to the OR. Never been my first time in the OR ever.
So this is your second year of college?
Yes, into my third year. And I had my first time in the OR. I walk into the main desk with my clothes on, and like, oh, you can't even go in. You gotta change into scrubs. Oh, this is a whole new world for me. So I had to wear this bunny suit, that I had to go over my clothes. And they told me OR 6. I couldn't find it. And finally, someone walked me in there. As I walk in, there's the neurosurgeon. There's the guy's head open. There's 3 residents in the room. Everyone with their hands crossed, waiting for me to get there. And this is not what I expected. And there was a navigation machine on the side, and they said, God, you finally got here. We've been waiting for a while. I'm like, I had no idea you guys were waiting. So where are we going to put this stimulator? And I was like, these guys are waiting for me to tell them what to do to this patient. This is amazing. So I put in the jump drive, I map it, I hit enter, I'm like, put it here. And they said, okay, thanks. And as I'm walking out, the neurosurgeon's doctor, his name was Grossman, he goes, hey, by the way, if you want to see what happens when I turn this on, come back tomorrow at 8 a.m. I said, okay, bye, and I left. That was my first experience as
that is amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So it took you. I mean, it grabbed you, obviously, with really that experience.
Yes.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So you obviously had to be good in school from an intellect perspective. Did you enjoy school?
I did. I went to, I tell my parents I'm thankful I went to like Oxford Emory or at Emory University.
In Georgia, right?
That's in Atlanta, Georgia, yeah. Okay. Because if I went to more of a party school, I don't know if I would be sitting here today. But having that kind of intellect around me and that kind of focus on education at that point pushed me towards making good grades. Yeah. One
of the things that strikes me about you in general and the folks that are going to be listening to this is that most doctors are unapproachable, and you have a great personality. You're easy to talk to. You're easy to discuss, different things in both layman terms and in technical terms. If you have to get there, you can go in and out, which is unique in your industry. And I know we spoke a little bit about this challenge that even you faced. We'll talk a little bit more about building up your practice group. But as far as neurosurgeons in general, you shared with me some interesting tidbits of information. Can you share that again with us?
Yeah, we talked about personalities in neurosurgery. And the reality is a lot of the stigmata of being a brain surgeon, quote unquote, is the fact that they're socially awkward. They may be smart. You want them to operate on you. They can be technically good, but they may not be able to socialize with you or have that coffee we talked about with that person. And the reality is one of the studies, I think, that we're looking at, residents or people who choose a particular specialty, interestingly enough, found that a percentage of people who become neurosurgeons are on a spectrum of autism, meaning that they're considered not necessarily savants in that sense. They're not fully savants, but they're Asperger type traits, which means that they are going to be a little bit socially awkward. In fact, we always joke about how Armin and myself, Armin's my partner, Amir Ahmadian, are a little bit of an outlier compared to the groups we trained with. We had a lot of those quote unquote Asperger-esque traits in our residency and across the country.
I think you guys are an outlier. I haven't met your partner yet, but obviously for you to get along, I'm sure you have similar traits, different traits as well in order for partnerships to exist, which I get into that conversation. But based on my experience, and I think the general public's experience in general, many high-functioning surgical experts may have difficulty in communicating in general because of their, I guess, their high functioning abilities, like you say, and some of those traits that you suggested.
Yeah, and you know, I even tell doctors that we lecture to, or even what we call advanced providers, nurse practitioners and PAs, and the reality is, you don't necessarily want your surgeon to have the best personality as long as they can do the job correctly. What you don't want is the opposite. A guy who has a great personality who's kind of fooling you into thinking they can actually do the correct surgery. I think one comes first before the other. I think you need to have that foundation, be a good surgeon, make sure you don't hurt any patients. And then the social aspect of it will come over time, hopefully, unless you're on that spectrum of not being as social as possible. One thing that most viewers don't realize is back in, probably in the early 80s, maybe even to late 80s, it was a kind of a star on the jacket of the training programs to push residents to get a divorce. Because it was a pyramid program. Most of the training programs back then were a pyramid. They hired 5 guys in a neurosurgical training program, which back then was part of a general surgery kind of umbrella. And only 2 of them or 1 of them would actually graduate to become a neurosurgeon. And there's advertisements of these schools that say, look, 100% if you've started as a married couple as a resident in neurosurgery, 100% of them have divorced because of it. Because there were no training hours, there was no respect to sleep, all those things. Now, those things have changed now, right? Due to restricted working hours, restrictive behavioral types, there's a big change going on. And I've seen it more and more in the last probably 3 to 5 years than I've ever have before. Let's
talk a little bit about, your current situation. You're not only a doctor, you're a businessman. You're approaching eight locations now with regard
7,
to seven with the practice, and under the umbrella for responsibility, how many employees do you currently have?
That's a good question. I think the last we checked were 78 employees.
78 employees. And these are things, obviously, that you don't learn in medical school, or how to run a business, how to pick the correct people. Yeah. How many doctors are under your wing?
Currently, I believe we have 5 surgeons and 2 pain doctors that are anesthesia trained.
So for your purposes of engaging these folks to come work with you, obviously you want them to have the skill set that you spoke about earlier, but are you also more or less trying to find individuals that kind of match your approach as far as interaction from a personality perspective, or is that something that really doesn't matter because they don't have to do the things that you and Armin need to do?
I think it really matters. I think it's near impossible to predict. Because we can interview a person, we can talk to them, they can shadow us, but we won't know how they actually are going to behave until they're under stress. Neurosurgical practice is synonymous with stressful situations, as you may imagine. And those personalities really come out when that person's under stress, when someone's dying and they got to do something. Those are the times where true personalities come out, in my opinion.
That's such a nugget, because we talk about that, especially obviously in your level of what you're dealing with life and death situations. But in general, we talk about this concept of, if you're going to engage with an individual and have that person either work for you, work with you, have a partnership or something like that, you want to actually observe them and watch them in settings where they don't know you're watching them. You want to see things that happen to them unexpectedly and how they react to it. So you can truly see, because when they're initially interviewing with you, or you're the courtship, so to speak, it's like the first date or second date, and they're on their best behavior.
Yes.
So in your particular instance, in your field, do you end up kind of giving them a trial? Like, how do you gauge that? I mean, do you hire them and then say, oh boy, I made a mistake, it seems that this individual can't handle it? Or
so it takes time for those personality traits to come out, and this is maybe a tidbit that the population would like. If you ever look at a surgeon's or a doctor's background, they're moving every about 2 years. That's about the time frame that they've documented where those conflicts will come out. So doctors, or particularly surgeons that have changed job every 2 years, and we do see that population of people going around, there's some type of flaw, whether that's a surgical set, where, as you guys may have seen on the Dr. Death podcasts.
Yeah,
very
yeah.
similar. He was a neurosurgeon as
He
well.
bounced around, yeah.
Yeah, all of them within 2 years, that either a complication profile comes out or their personality conflict comes out to the point where they can't maintain that job. And that's one of the criteria that we use. Has this doctor who's applying, this surgeon who's applying to be with us, moved around a lot? Oh, he's moved down every 2 to 3 years. We would take that person off as a potential candidate for ourselves.
So in your field, you know, I never even thought of it from that perspective on the documentation side. Generally, in today's day and age, we do see so many people moving around. It's not like, you know, you're younger than me, but back in the day, people would stay on with a career with the same employer for many years or whatever the field they may be in for a long time. Nowadays, people bounce around, and you know, I call it the Google age, the time period in which, you know, nobody wants to work for anything; they just want to accept it immediately. And if they're not only necessarily the entitlement, but the carrot gets dangled, and they see another opportunity, and they skip and go to that opportunity, you know, blindly. Yes. So we see it too in our field too. I always try to balance, like, what was the reason why an individual may have left when I'm, you know, in the hiring phase of somebody. You mean 10 jobs in 5 years? What's going on?
Right.
But your industry, wow, that's interesting on the document side. And I remember the Dr. Death whole thing and how the hospitals were actually hesitant in that particular sense to actually document and let it be known for fear of, well, it was odd. I mean, the way they portrayed it was litigation, you know, in part.
Yeah, that's a whole separate podcast we can probably do on doctors who work for hospital systems. Because the hospital systems have to protect themselves. And sometimes I think there may be a conflict between doing what's right and protecting them from a legal perspective.
Yeah.
And we saw that in the Dr. Death documentary.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
Yeah.
That was actually fascinating. We should put a link on that for people to see, to watch that, because that was very educational. So let me move to another topic, which is something that I brought up to you earlier, and it's what I call alpha and alpha. and I'll use that as the little framing for our discussion point. I'm married to an alpha. My wife, who's my best friend, and I love dearly, she runs her own business. She has a medical spa and an aesthetic practice. Your wife has the same thing, and she runs it. So for our viewers and listeners, how do you guys balance your career objectives? You have kids, your family life, and all that. Yeah. How do you handle that in today's day and age?
Well, my wife, as you know, is also a very much an alpha, and we're both Scorpios as well. So, so that's an interesting tidbit as well. The reality is, when we first, got to know each other and got married and kind of grew up together in a sense, not in the sense of age, but in the sense of maturity. As I started my business and really helped her start hers. I'm not saying it's necessarily difficult, but you have to understand, you have to treat that person as an equal, and that's the hard part. She's a CEO of her own company. She may have opinions that I may not agree with regarding expansion of that company. But I have to give her the same clout I give my partner and within my company. That was initially a challenge for me because I wanted to say, no, you should do this. Well, no, she doesn't want to do that, right? So the reality is, once I was able to kind of accept her as a CEO, I think that aspect of her career actually got a lot easier for her. But she does everything. She's also the CEO of the house. She handles the kids. We have three wonderful kids, and she does everything for them. I want to be clear, I can't do what she does, right? I can't run a company and the house. She's doing that for herself and for us as a family. So I do admire her and look up to her for that.
Obviously, you both respect and love each other, and that had to start somewhere in the beginning. For the courtship phase for you guys, were you done with school at the time? Was she done with school? Where were you in your careers?
I was a resident at Tampa General here as a neurosurgical resident. And during that period of time, at least in the first few years of the residency, there was no real restrictions on time. So I was working all the time, as you might have imagined. And she was a nurse in the same hospital, in the neuro ICU. Now, I didn't meet her in the hospital. I actually met her out in a social setting. to find out she'd worked in the unit and was actively working in the unit was kind of a plus for us because I got to see her at work and outside. But I met her outside of the hospital, even though she worked in the same unit I covered.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, she obviously understood the stressors and,
Yes.
and respected what you had to go through. I think that's key too. There was an understanding, and you understood and respected what she had to go through.
Yes.
So how did you navigate through that? Because, you know, it didn't get easier for you where you were when you first met. It became more difficult.
It did. And understanding is very important in any physician family relationships. Both partners, especially if the male is the physician, and there needs to be understanding. I think it's very hard for a life partner, to understand what a neurosurgeon goes through, both in training, but as well as what that life means outside. When my phone goes off at every hour of the night, where I have to go at any one point, where we have to take 2 cars to any social events just because I may have to go. That kind of concept is not easily understood. People say, oh, like, you know what, they'll get it. But no, she understood it from the beginning because she saw it. Well, before we dated, she knew medicine. She saw the neurosurgeons. She was around that environment. So I think that helped us come together.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that that's an interesting point too, because in relationships in general, both parties obviously have to respect each other.
Yes.
And there needs to be an understanding and support between each other for their particular careers and what they're doing. Many times what happens, they'll just agree with it initially, yes. But, you know, as time progresses and it actually takes place, then, you know, oh, it's been validated. You know, I didn't have to get into an argument post, you know, me taking off, going somewhere and have to do something because she understood. I think it also takes a special individual, either the male or the female, to also be secure within themselves to respect the other individual. Because, you know, idle mind is the devil's playground, is this phrase that goes around at times. And I know personally in past experiences that I've been through, because I'm high functioning alpha, my wife is high functioning alpha, I think the platform has, you know, the foundation has already been established in that there's a commonality of understanding among each of us. And so the respect there exists.
Yes.
I think in relationships in general with people, if you end up, you know, falling for somebody maybe because of how they look and you know, and not diving deep into that individual, whatever they're doing. And I'm not saying that it has to be another alpha, but somebody who has a career or has aspirations or is doing something outside of you, you know, doing something for themselves, then it becomes easier for you both to grow together, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that alpha men tend to like beta women, to be honest with you, because it makes them more alpha. Even they're alpha at home and they're alpha outside the home. I think it takes a special type of alpha man to be able to support an alpha female at home, because you guys are both alphas. That sets up the foundation for significant conflict. And one thing that you know, I think about all the time, I don't see conflict as a negative thing. I think conflict, every time I've had a conflict with my alpha wife, it may come to a head. But when it does, afterwards, the understanding is even stronger. The relationship is stronger.
Absolutely.
The connection is stronger. So I see conflict as, okay, yeah, we're having a conflict, but we're going to get through it. You know, we're both Scorpios. We're going to fight. But the reality is, afterwards, I'm much more connected with her.
And you grow from it, and you do grow stronger from it as well.
Yes.
I think that sometimes when people put their head in the sand thinking it's going to go away, that's the issue that they deal with later on. It comes up again. Or the argument of unresolved conflict comes up again when you're having a new argument about something else.
So we resolve our conflicts will come to a head. I don't like things lingering in my relationship. So within 3 to 4 days, even if something's, you know, a big conflict, 3 to 4 days, it is resolved. Like we will have it out. We will discuss it. We will do what we need to do. The conflict will come to a head within that period of time.
Yeah, that's.
I don't like lingering. Oh, a month later. Oh, remember what you did on last January? No, I don't, and it doesn't matter.
It's such an important concept. I talk about we speak about relationships a lot on the podcast, and I think for any individual who is aspiring to become a business owner
Yeah.
pursuing their passion entrepreneurially, whether it be in medicine, whatever field they may be in, they need to have a supportive spouse.
Yes.
I think you got lucky in a way.
Very much so.
You know, I got lucky third time around. So I'll be proud to admit I got another chance. And as far as I'm concerned, I feel blessed.
Yeah.
Frankly, I don't think that for me, I was emotionally ready to actually accept, you know, to be able to engage with my wife that I have now. I didn't develop the skills or the emotional intelligence, so to speak, to recognize the importance of a partner like my wife.
Yes.
Now, you figured it out early, it appears.
Well, I like to say that she found me, you know. I did get lucky in that sense, yes.
Yeah, for sure. That's incredible. So let me segue a little bit about to you know, the business itself. Yeah. Why did you decide to become your own boss? What was that something that you always wanted? Because many doctors end up either working for a hospital, working in a group. There's a sense of, I guess, comfort in getting a paycheck, and not having to really think through the business side. And you know, for our viewers and listeners, unless I'm mistaken, they're not teaching you how to run a practice in medical school, correct?
Not at all.
Okay, so how did you decide that that's what you want to do? And what tools or what was available for you to kind of take that journey?
Well, back to what you said, most training programs promote exactly the opposite. They want you to go into academic medicine, which means working for a university. And that's what they train towards. So when you leave that environment, training centers look down upon it per se. So they don't promote entrepreneurship at all.
Excuse me, when you say training sessions, they look down at, you mean the educational, the institutions itself?
Yes.
They look down on it.
Yes. So they want residencies, right? You know, as you're a doctor, you become a doctor, you go through residencies. Residencies train doctors to work for universities. Here, University of South Florida, or Florida, you know, or Miami. They want you to work for a training program where you are, you know, training others, not independently thinking, not creating a company, not being an entrepreneur. You have to learn that on your own. That's why such a small subset of doctors actually can run a business, or at least attempt to. There's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of fear mongering that you're not going to make it. Don't even try. The insurance companies you're not going to make any money. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of that going on, believe it or not, in training programs.
Before
you graduate. And then once you go out, like when I first graduated, I did join a hospital system as a physician. I kept contact with my co-residents and currently my partner, and he stayed on as an academic doctor. So academic surgeon at University of South Florida. I was a community-based surgeon based on a hospital system. And we talked, and it took about 3 years to really realize that you have these golden handcuffs, right? You want to take care of your patients, yes, but there are opportunities where you can do things better. But no one wants you to do that. They want you to stay within the mold. If you want to do things better, and whether it's from efficiency, whether it's from patient care perspective, change things, you need to have your own control. So we decided to both quit our jobs. We picked a date. It was October 1st, 2017. And we both submitted our resignation letters to start the company. It was me, him, and like a front desk and a practice manager. It was 4 of us.
So when you decided to make that decision, which is such an interesting, I never knew that. It's such an interesting point. You built it up at that point. It took a lot of planning to do that. Yeah. So when did you sit down with your wife ahead of time? Like how did that develop?
You know, I always, listen to my wife most of the time, but she gives me good advice, and she was unsure. She's like, "Are you sure you want to quit your job?" We got paid very well. It wasn't about money. This was not about money.
I'm sure you did.
We were both making over 7 figures at our jobs. So it wasn't about money. And we kept bringing that up. Hey guys, when he talked to his wife, I'm sure, and said, this is not about money. It's about being able to do the right thing.
Most of entrepreneurial journeys and business people, when they get, I think from foundational level, when they have certain experience of levels of education and training and wherever they are, it's not about money. Yeah. It's about, life's too short, right? It's about growth, interpersonal growth. It's about passion. Yes. It's about what I want to do. Yes. And you essentially, from what you've shared with us, you were a widget. You were essentially a link in a chain in this huge
ubiquitous system, institutional bureaucratic mess, like
very
the
much
swamp.
so.
We don't want to get into politics, but you were basically stuck in an institutional swamp.
Yes.
And you were probably dying a slow death
Yes.
in that.
Yes, because someone else is telling you what to do, even though they don't tell you your patient care perspective. They kind of do, right? Like, listen, there are a lot of forces upon you to do things if you work for a system, and for us to be able to make that decision to start things from scratch per se and control our own destiny was to take risk. And I remember many nights when I would talk to my partner before we did this about risk mitigation, and that without risk there isn't reward, and the biggest risk would be to quit your job when you have a family, when you have a kid, and you need them to support you to make that decision.
Absolutely.
And we had no net, underneath us. It was we have to make it, and with that drive, and he's got a great drive as well, and I admire that about my partner. That's the only way we made it through. Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about your partner too, because I like to get into that discussion point about yin and yangs and things like that. But let's go back, because our listeners, this is going to be a good nugget. So a lot of people talk about, okay, I'm going to start a business. I'm going to develop a business plan, and my business plan is going to have X, Y, and Z. And I know for me personally, and with my wife, and I had her on the podcast, we didn't have a business plan. She didn't have a business plan. She knew she didn't want debt.
Yes.
She knew from her own personality, and I knew from her personality, she does not sleep well having debt.
Yes.
So we did things very slowly, methodically in that regard, building it up for her to the point where she was able, okay, now I'll get the laser, now I'll do this, now I'll do that. But I'm not going to become handcuffed, so to speak, to service a debt and have to, compromise how I want to practice with my new business. How did you guys reconcile the development of your plans?
Oh, very much so similar in the sense that we did not have a business plan. We knew that we practiced medicine well. We knew that the medicine environment in this city can be improved. And we had a concept of outcome-driven care, meaning that if there are certain procedures or interventions that we know aren't the greatest outcome, we just didn't do them. We didn't recommend it for that patient. So we focused, our entire concept of practice was outcomes driven. If the outcomes are good, we'll promote it and make it better. If there's any evidence of poor outcome, that's something we didn't do. That was what we started out with as a foundation. Did not have a business plan, did not even have a bank to go for a loan. It was all personal money that we had saved. And we put in similar amounts into a bank account, and that was it. That was going to either float or sink. And we had a lot of motivation for get it to float.
So you go ahead, you basically file you create a corporation, you and your partner, and then you basically have to go out and hunt for space.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you guys hunt for space. You have to sign for a lease, or did you guys buy a building? What did you do initially?
We signed for a lease, a 3 or 5 year lease, something basic. And then based on our particular specialties, we try to partner with a hospital, meaning that a hospital system that needs that service line. So we strategically put our offices on or near hospital campuses that needed neurosurgeons.
Oh, that made sense. Let me back up a little bit, because I deal with it in my world. I deal with non-competes and things along those lines. Did you guys obviously had to do your due diligence in that regard? Were you locked into anything at the time that you had to get out of, or did something hit you later after the fact?
Well, he did. Armin had a big non-compete. I didn't have, my non-compete was relatively small, so my office space that we picked was still catching from all of the patients I was taking care of. They didn't necessarily mind. It was an issue for me. For him, there was a big issue. So we had placed our office strategically just outside of his non-compete, literally probably 500 feet outside of the line of non-compete. So we did have to mitigate through that with his 1.5 year or 2 year non-compete that he had.
Did you reach out to other experts in other areas, whether it be lawyers, accountants, anything like that in the formative years, or did you just do it on your own?
We didn't know. We weren't business people, so we did it on our own. We didn't have anyone to call. If we asked our other doctors, the first thing they would say,
"Don't do it.
You're crazy to do it. You're making this much money. Why would you ever think about quitting?" And and that was the foundation. Any person you asked, The only people that were like, we're going to do this was me and my partner. Everyone else was like, oh, you guys are crazy for doing this.
Wow. Wow. So you guys figure out the place, you sign the lease, and then you said you brought 2 people with you?
We didn't even know that we needed a practice manager.
Yeah.
We were renting the space from, actually subleasing initially from the university who Armin used to work for. And the person who was showing us the space was a practice manager for the vascular division or something. And she was showing us the space to sublease. And I looked at Armin, I'm like, she seems like a good practice manager. Let's just offer her a job, see what happens. And her name is Andrea. She's still with us today.
Wow. That's how it happens.
She took the job, and she was our practice manager.
That's how it happens.
Yeah.
And then obviously, the journey then commences at that point.
Yes.
Dealing with the privileges at the various hospitals, and obviously you're practicing medicine still at the time you're building out the business. And you started with 1.
Yes.
And it was just you and your partner.
Yeah.
And now you have 5 doctors working for you?
5 surgeons, 2 pain doctors.
And 2 pain doctors, so 7 under you.
Yeah.
And then you have collectively another about 45 or 50 employees somewhere in that mix as well?
Well, we have a total of 78 employees now. We have about 10 APPs, PAs and nurse practitioners. And then now we have an imaging division with an MRI and X-ray, and we have a physical therapy division that does all the physical therapy for spine. Just different aspects of it have kind of flourished.
In less than 10 years, you've created...
6 years, yeah.
6 years you've created this, which is, frankly, in my opinion, an incredible kudos to you guys and how you've built this out. And I'm sure there was a lot of challenges along the way that you all went through. Is there anything in particular that you could share with us that you remember that you guys dealt with?
Yeah, I think, I listen, it's coming from a person who didn't have an MBA, who didn't have any business background. Read the contract you're going to sign. Because we were just doctors. So they said, oh, this is what this contract says. We're buying a surgery center, for example. We signed probably 3 or 4 contracts that what they said wasn't actually what was in the contract.
Of course, unfortunately, that's what happens.
So if I can give any advice to any entrepreneur, if you're going to be locked into any contract, make sure you read it. And in fact, it's not about you reading it. Make sure someone who knows how to read contracts read it. So now we have multiple lawyers that read all of our contracts. But at the beginning, we didn't have that. It was us trying to understand legal verbiage.
I had a doctor on beginning of the first season of the podcast who shared a story very similar to that with us with regard to signing a contract where she did it on her own. It was a laser guy basically telling her that just sign this and blah, blah, blah. It turns out she ended up having to stroke a check for like $50,000 later on when they took the laser. Why do you think you guys just, you made those little decisions? Do you think it was because you trusted the individuals at the time? You thought that these individuals had your best interests at mind, or did you think were you too arrogant? Did you think you understood, or that you were? What do you think?
Definitely not arrogance. We come from a place of medicine, so we want our patients to trust us, and we trust our patients when they tell us they have a problem. Well, when we come to contract negotiations, particularly in a hospital setting or in a facility setting, we're dealing with actually other doctors. There was one particular contract where it was a conglomerate of doctors buying a surgery center. We trusted the fact that the doctors were being honest. So trust is one thing that in entrepreneurship is you must verify. And remember that, because it can come back. And then listen, I don't see that as a negative thing. We learned from it. Over the last 6 years, we've probably made a few things that I'd like to reverse. But the reality is, because I've learned that, now I got to do a different thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I end up dealing with things after the fact in my area of expertise. And many times, no good deed goes unpunished is what I end up telling my clients, because you want to approach things, obviously, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're running a business with this guise that the individual that you're working with is approaching it the same way, or at least you hope that that's the case. But at the end of the day, that's not the case. There's there could be this assumption that you're not going to read something. They're going to try and take it, whatever it is. There's nothing wrong with protecting yourself and surrounding yourself with individuals who have subject matter expertise in whatever area that you need help in. And that's crucial to running any business.
Yes.
You know?
Especially in the field of healthcare. I think doctors initially come out to trust hospitals because doctors work in hospitals. But hospitals are notorious for bullying physicians. And that's one thing that the layman out there may not realize. But doctors who are looking to expand, they need to understand that they are not on your side.
Yeah, we deal with it, and in particular, we deal with hospital issues and billing issues with hospitals as well, that are ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. It's again this ubiquitous monster,
intentionally confusing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and different charge masters, and just totally different billing systems that are in place, predicated on the patient and things like that. So you've kind of like cut the cord, so to speak, with regard to having to be indentured to the man or to the system by running your own business, which is great. For anybody, whether it be a doctor or an entrepreneur or anybody listening or watching us that are aspiring to run their own business or to, make that decision to move away and do some of the things that you did. Yeah. Is there anything else you can share with them that you've kind of learned along the journey to get you to where you are?
Yeah, I see friends who want to be entrepreneurs who struggle to make that leap. I think as long as you embrace the fact that you must take risk to succeed or fail, but without risk, there really is not a reward. No one started a company not taking any risk. You can take over your father's company, but your father's taking the risk that you're not going to run that company into the ground. The reality is, if you're going to be a true entrepreneur, embrace risk. Now, don't be dumb about it, right? Don't mitigate that risk, but embrace it and understand that without risk, there is no reward. And that, like I said earlier, read your contract and verify.
Oh yeah, for sure. The risk aspect, I think what people tend to forget or tend to get dismayed by is that they may have failed in the past. And unfortunately, what happens in life, I think sometimes, is that people have to deal with this issue of failure and thinking that, okay, I blew it, or I don't have the ability to do it again. I always implore people, do your due diligence with regard to whatever endeavor you want to get in. You have to do your due diligence. And then, like you said, there is going to be risk. If there wasn't risk, everybody would be doing it, right? Correct. So you're going to have to navigate that risk. But I also feel that it's crucial for people to kind of do a barometer check on themselves. In other words, they have to be in tune with themselves personally as far as what they can take. Yes. in their particular environment. You did it with your family in order to ensure that the journey that you were going on. I believe that if your wife was the naysayer and wasn't supportive of the decision that you and your now partner were going to make, that you would probably be divorced. That you may not have, or not have started the company, and then that hole would be existing. Nobody can define, I think, one's passion or desire to do something. You're not necessarily doing it for purposes of making tons of money. You're doing it to feed yourself as a person, as a human being. We only get one shot, right, at life to do that. So I think that that's something that our listeners and viewers really need to take a good look at yourself and where you are in life. And in many instances, there may be circumstances where they're with a partner that is holding them back for whatever reason. Oh, yeah. And they have to recognize, what they need to do if this is their journey that they want to participate in. Because nothing is easy in life. I say that all the time. People look from the outside and see things, whether it be on Instagram and all these things, and he's got the car, he's got the house, he's got the wife. No. Well, and how did he get that? It really comes down to an individual making, decisions about themselves personally and be able to decide how to move forward. Let me go to another topic because I found myself personally, with regard to business and entrepreneurship, I do better alone. And what I mean by that is I've had partners. Obviously, I do better with my wife, but that's not, aside from that. As far as running my business, I do better by myself. And it took a while for me to get there. I had to deal with, a bunch of partners. I had to deal with working for a big institutional company at a time. I went through these different periods in my life. I kind of evolved to where I am now. Very, very blessed and comfortable as to where I am now and coming to terms with that. I ended up coming to terms with that later in life. I see businesses in general, very successful businesses with partnerships. And there is a little bit of envy. Actually, envy, respect. A better term is respect in those partners, because for whatever reason, whether it be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, this partnership, business partnership has existed. And there is no doubt in my mind that each individual is bringing something to the table that that other individual doesn't have in order for that business to be successful. They may not have known it at the time that they started their business.
Correct.
But wherever they are now in life, they have this, symbiotic but yin and yang relationship in which they complement each other in different traits that is allowing them to succeed. Is that something that you can kind of reflect at now and discuss with us about with your partner?
Yes, I think partnerships are important. I think I have a philosophy a little bit different than yours. I think I use the philosophy, and I've said this before even in my practice, that we are stronger together. Stronger together, not just partners, but employed physicians in general in the field of medicine. The reality is, my partnership with my current partner at my company is really a true yin and yang, the good guy, the bad guy. When he's negotiating, I am the devil's advocate. When I'm negotiating, he's the devil's advocate. We actually have our clinics simultaneously. When I see a patient, I'm like, hey, what would you do here surgically? He's like, I would do this. I'm like, that's interesting. Didn't think of it that way. Sometimes I'll go along with it. Sometimes I'm like, I wouldn't do that. I would do it this way. That kind of respect, per se, is what allowed us to kind of go forward. I have, and again, I hope he doesn't hear this, but I've had friends that come up and they're like, how can you be partners with that guy? And I've known him all through my residency. He's the nicest guy in the world to me. And I tell him, listen, it's the yin and the yang. Like, we get along very well. Now, I know partnerships break up at some point, and you should always, if you're creating a company, you should, plan for that as a potential future. But from our perspective, we haven't had any significant conflict.
When you guys initially became friends, you obviously became friends through the residency process. And I'm just thinking of this, and my discussion points aren't necessarily specific with regard to him and you, but just in general. Did you see things in him that you felt that you didn't have, that kind of leaned you towards him, that you may have admired? Because you obviously had to develop a respect for each other in order for you to engage in a business venture.
Yeah. So in our field, it's not about looking for something that you don't have for someone to fulfill. It's more about having something that we can complement each other on. I'll give you an example. For this company to work, I needed another excellent surgeon who could operate without fear, right? Who do I know that is an excellent surgeon? The surgeon I trained with for 7 years. I knew exactly what kind of surgeon he was. I knew exactly what he did under stress, because we were residents together at the hospital. I knew his personality. I needed someone else who could function. The kiss of death for my practice would have been, I started a practice of my own. I hired Joe Schmo, who under pressure in the first year is falling apart. Even if my partner, that company would have failed. So, and there were other residents in that group that wanted to join us, and Armin and I were like, no. And not no because of they weren't complimenting, they were bringing different connections and advertisement. That wasn't the point. We needed the foundation to be strong. A good surgeon who made the right decisions. And that was only the person that I could have done that with.
So you predicated it solely on his skill sets that you observed. Did you know him on a personal basis at the time? Or
I worked with a guy 140 hours a week for 7 years.
So you know him.
I knew him pretty well. Yeah. And he was a friend, yes, but he was also a colleague. We trained together. So the reality is, you may not necessarily want a partner who fulfills your gaps, but maybe a partner who strengthens your features that you need to succeed. if that's, for us, that was outcomes driven surgery. I was looking for someone who was surgically able to give me the outcomes in patient care that I wanted in my practice.
So moving on then, you obviously, you've got that relationship going as you move forward. What about other traits in business itself?
Yeah.
How did that come about? Because obviously you trained with him, but how do you both approach a business venture?
From the exact opposite sides. I tell him, in fact, I told him this on Friday. I said, look, you say no to every idea I got. And that's why I bring it to you first. And I said, look, 90% of the time I convince you within 6 months.
So there you go. There's the yin and the yang with regard to the other things.
That is.
So in a way, it kind of keeps you in check.
It does. I'm the risk taker per se, and he's a little bit older. By a couple of years.
Yeah.
And he seems to be, the voice of reason, but he's always the first naysayer. And that it forces me to go and look this, okay, I was looking at this angle. Here's a potential complication I didn't think about for this new venture. And then I go on back and find a solution to that venture, to his question. So I think that yin and yang really works for us. And I think we have anywhere from 17 LLCs now together.
Yeah.
In different aspects.
So you've done different things together.
Correct.
And continue to do things
Correct.
together.
And that's another thing in partnerships. We don't hide things from each other. Like any kind of investments that comes across my table from my kind of resources, I literally say, hey, this came on my table, let's invest together. Or, hey, let's go in on this together. And just about 100% of the things that we're involved in together.
Well, just in your personal relationship and the respect that you have with your wife, it's clear you guys have this respect from a business perspective.
Yes.
That you would even do things like that together,
Yes.
that you guys are intertwined in many respects that way.
It'll be harder to divorce my partner than my wife at this
point.
Well,
I'll tell you,
the companies.
I will tell you, I've dealt with business divorces. I talk about it, and it is very ugly. And again, it's intertwined to an nth degree in many instances. But with regard to the your relationship from a business side, as you continue on, it's clear that you're lucky. I would say you're lucky. I mean, sometimes it's methodical the way it develops out, but you both clearly have a passion to grow.
Yes.
So the fire is still in you both to continue to move forward in different ways, which I found as an outsider observing various businesses, whether it be a law practice, a very successful law practice. I have some friends who have developed multi-state law practices, and I kind of watch it and how it occurs. And when I look at the relationship among the two core individuals or three or whatever it is, just like you said, from a core specific skill set, whether they're an attorney or a doctor, that's a given.
Has to be.
That they have.
Yeah.
So I think that creates the immediate respect among peers to engage. And then as you move forward, there are traits that each individual has that the other may not have, or not to that degree.
Yes.
Whether it be from a marketing perspective, whether it be to embracing risk perspective. And I think so long as each other respects that difference, that you both bring different things to the table and you communicate about it and open and transparent about things, you can flourish and grow. And when I look back at some of these businesses that I've observed and even counseled, I see that seems to be the case. Fortunately for me, I haven't been lucky enough other than my wife to find that. So hence, I continue on my solo path. Though it doesn't mean that I discourage it, and it doesn't mean that I don't admire and respect it, because it works.
Yeah.
In fact, I think sometimes it's crucial for growth.
I think so. Yeah. You have to respect that person in the sense that you guys are not competing. And that's the biggest thing. And earlier in our practice, we really wanted him to understand that we're not competing. We're both surgeons of the same practice. It doesn't matter how many surgeries I do. The only thing we're competing against is better outcomes. That was the whole premise of our entire practice. And when we compete for better outcomes, we both excel. So our patients are happier. That was the grassroots efforts to bring us to where we are today. But he does have traits that that I don't necessarily have, but I think complements that some of the things that he does from a business perspective, right? I'm up at 4 o'clock every morning. He's up at 4 o'clock every morning. He shoots his first email off at 4:15. It comes up on my phone first, and I'm like, oh, you're awake, So, those are the traits that I think are great for any entrepreneur. No entrepreneur slept at 10 a.m.
Oh, no. Yeah. You're working. You're doing weekends, There's no such thing. It just continues on. And the fact that he's like that, again, compliments and continues to help you grow. I want to bring up another point. It may be somewhat stereotypical. I don't necessarily think so because I've lived it. I come from a background of, I'm half Armenian and half Italian. So I got the opportunity, my grandparents, my grandfather on my father's side came from Alexandria, Egypt. Grandmother came from Istanbul, Turkey. They came to the States. My dad was born in New York. But I got experienced to have dinners with my grandparents and my family and learn different things. And my dad had his own business. He had dry cleaning stores. So I got to observe all that. So from my perspective, that immigrant story, the hardworking, the core of family helped me develop, I believe, as to who I am. Armenians have a very strong familial relationships among themselves, somewhat to the point sometimes I say clannish, and I mean that because I'm half Italian and I've experienced it where I'm like not full Armenian, so I felt sometimes that I wasn't fully taken in on the Armenian side, and then when I was on the Italian side, they didn't care. I was Italian. It was but on the Armenian side, but I have a lot of friends who are, there's not as many, but on the Armenian side. Once you meet an Armenian, there's a certain sense of pride among us, connection, because of what historically we all know our ancestors went through. Yeah. So your partner's background, there's probably no doubt that he experienced, I don't know his age, but he probably experienced some 45. Of the things that, all right, so he's younger than me, but he experienced some of the things that I experienced through my familial background. You also developed, maybe unbeknownst to you, let's just say core traits that you really didn't know you were developing from a family perspective, whether it be respect, honor, integrity, things like that, just through your heritage. Yes. Have you ever thought of that dynamic, or do you think that played into anything with regard to the successes that you have with your partner?
I never thought about it, but as you're describing it, I can see the traits that he has, the devotion that he has to his family, that I have to my family. Our work life is intrusive into our personal life at all aspects of time. To be able to disconnect that and say, this is home time, is very important and not always possible in our field. And being able to, literally, I tell Armin, I hang out. I mean, I'm at work with him when I'm home with my wife sometimes, but when I'm home with my wife and kids, I'm home with my wife and kids. Like, we have that respect. So I'm not texting him, unless the hospitals get in kind of reach of him, but I wouldn't bother him in that situation. And I think that same core connection to his family, just like I have mine, we have to the business. So when we're at work, we're at work. So there isn't, there's that kind of devotion, I think, to the business as well. And no one else can have that. We've tried, we've considered bringing on other partners. They just don't have the devotion. You have to eat, sleep, and drink this company for it to succeed.
I think it'd be very difficult for you to actually get somebody like that, because I think that people don't realize that, like even this podcast that I did, I mean, when you start something from I don't want to say a dream, but an idea, and even your own business, nobody's going to bleed for you like you. Nobody's going to take that on like you. And you're fortunate in that your partner and you started at the same time. Yes. So you both have this vested interest in doing it. But I will say you both have, I could tell, core values that have allowed you to grow to the point that you're at now, and much success.
And his father's from Alexandria, Egypt too. So I think you guys have a pretty good connection there. Yeah. So.
See, it is really interesting how that plays into it. I used to get teased growing up about it because most Armenians were entrepreneurs, in all different industries. Yeah. And is that ingrained in us? I don't know, from a younger age, but I just, nobody tells you all the risk. Like my dad never really shared with me, the the challenges and the risks that he faced in running his business. I just knew that we lived a comfortable life, and he never made us worry about things.
And we shelter our children as well from, the risk, because risk is uncertain, right? And you don't want your children to live in uncertainty. So that's probably that's what I would do, and I currently do with my kids as well.
Yeah.
Give them stability and certainty, not risk and uncertainty. Because entrepreneurship is uncertain.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Would you encourage your children? Do you think you'd encourage them to go that route, or have you ever thought of that?
As a neurosurgeon,
no,
or
as an entrepreneur?
Entrepreneur, 100%. As a doctor, we got to talk about that one.
Yeah. So in hindsight, you that's an area that you like. If you had to do a do-over, would you go into medicine?
Do everything I've done so far. Yes,
so it
was the right decision for me. But the sacrifices that we have made to get to this point, if you have to really love it, you're not doing it for the money. The neurosurgeons, they make, from a comparative perspective, more quote unquote money, but they're not doing it for the money. Those guys went through hell to get to where they are. They really have. They've sacrificed everything, 7 years of residency. They went through that not to make money, because they loved what they did. And that's what people have to understand. Certain doctors it's not about opening a company where you would just advertise and make money. This isn't about that. You can't be a neurosurgeon that easily. It's very select population in the United States, 3,500, I believe, in the last count in all of the country. Give
our audience a sense of understanding of that. So 3,500 neurosurgeons in the whole country actively practicing in comparison to, say, orthopedics. Do you have an idea of that number?
I don't have that number, but it's multiple times more.
Yeah, I would assume it'd be hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah.
We'd have to check it. Fact checker, check this. But
just look at how many orthopedics in the city of Tampa compared to how many neurosurgeons in the city of Tampa.
Again, for our viewers and listeners, the distinction, what's the difference between an orthopedist and a neurosurgeon? It's more, you guys are dealing with nerves. Obviously, you're dealing with, tell me, brain and things like that, which are completely different than an orthopedist. Yeah,
they're totally different. It's totally special. It's separate specialty, separate everything. I think the only area that question really comes about, because they handle bones and joints and everything, is the spine. I think the spine is kind of the overlap that we see there.
Which is what percentage of your business, of your practice, spines?
97%. Yeah, there are not that many brain tumors in the world.
Yeah.
At this point, at my current place in my company, I only assist with younger surgeons wanting to do brain tumors, or something that comes to the ER, or someone that I know, they want me to get involved in their cranial cases. But we do see them through the ER pretty regularly. But there's much more spine pathology than there's brain pathology. The reality is there are plenty of good orthopedic spine surgeons out there. It's just the training is very different. And, and a neurosurgeon does 7 years of spine. An orthopedic does 5 years of orthopedics and then a year of spine fellowship. After they come out, within 3 to 5 years, they're probably just as good as, there's just different philosophies.
Sure.
So I have plenty of orthopedic spine friends, and they're great surgeons. Yeah.
We've talked so much about business. We've talked about personal life. We've talked about risk and all that. How do you balance all the things going on in your life as where you are now? In other words, I talk about a concept called hybrid entrepreneurship. And what I mean by that is that, it's not enough to be just an expert in one particular area. And what happens in many instances, and I see this in life, is that an individual is so focused on one particular area of their life.
Yeah.
And many times you have to, like for you focus so much on your schooling and education for your career.
Right.
But in many times it becomes not only a part where it completely defines them, but it takes over their life. And it takes over their life in a negative way. If I put in a bowl, if I put in your career as a neurosurgeon, your relationship with your family, you put in your health, for whatever reason, one outgrows the other.
Yes. And health always loses.
At
least in my field, yes.
Yes, it always loses. And that you segue to where I'm going with this, because I encourage a hybrid entrepreneur. And that concept is that don't allow yourself to succumb to solely focusing
Yes.
on one particular area. And we get so caught up in it because we want to succeed and we want to fill that, that void. So you want to continue that growth process at whatever passion you're in, but you lose sight of others.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, if you don't have your health, this is for naught. Right?
That's true.
So how do you reconcile and balance that?
I think I still struggle in that, to be honest with you. I think that still, of those three things in a bowl that you described, health still takes a back seat. It takes a back seat if any of the other two things that come up at the same time, right? For example, every morning my wife goes for a 4-mile run, right, before I go to work. I've never been able to actually exercise in the morning because I'm taking care of the kids, right? So family trumps my health for that. Doctors in general are terrible patients. So doctors don't see doctors for their own health. That's something that I think is changing as time goes on. I think doctors are starting to become more in tune with their own health. We do focus on the company and the business. That's one thing. We focus on the education. We talked about this the other. But I feel like as you start a company or as you start a career, or whatever that is your main focus. If you neglect your family, you will lose them. So that's the second thing you try to kind of keep up so you don't lose them. And hopefully at some point, by the time you're 45, you bring health into that equation as well.
I see it in the gym all the time. I feel so bad for people, demographics anywhere from say 30, 35, more so in the later in their life, 50 to 60, with their belly out, they can't eat, so bad, but they're trying to play catch up.
Yes.
So the reason I bring this topic up is for the people who may be watching and listening, that it's okay to take care of yourself. And I think the challenge that people face, I faced it personally, really until I met my wife, is that I felt that I couldn't take care of myself, that I would be not performing my duties if I moved in another direction towards taking care of myself. And, you can think that, oh, well, did it this way, hindsight's, 50, who knows, would have occurred had I done it earlier. I feel blessed that I've embraced it now more so, but I think that it's an important discussion point for people to recognize that the hardest part is starting, right?
Yes.
The hardest part is starting and modifying and basically shifting your routine into another area. But it's a risk. Just like we talked about, right?
Yeah.
It's a risk that we have to take because at the end of the day, there's a greater risk in place on that. So it's one of those things where I suggest to people who are watching and listening to take that other risk, just like you took the risk with regard to your career, because the flip side to it is that you're not going to be able to enjoy all the things you really covet.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. I think that most men, at least in the realm I can see with my experiences, really start thinking about their health, or they should be, in their mid-40s. And that may be too late for some people, right? If you're morbidly obese, the atherosclerosis is set in, all of those things. The true hybrid entrepreneur does that early. And I can tell you for myself, I didn't. I focused on the company and the family, and always the health has always been a third seat. And only now, as I turn 43, am I thinking, okay, all right, those boxes are checked off. Now I need to focus on me.
I think that's what happens a lot with people. I think that those boxes get checked off and they go, now it's okay. We're financially secure. The business is secure. My family life is good here. Now it's my turn. Frankly, I don't think that's what we should do. But I think it's the challenge that we all face. I think the alpha takes over for us in that we have to, it's like the caveman mentality that we have to hunt. We have to do what we have to do to protect and make sure our family is taken care of and make sure our career, whatever it may be, for whatever reason, we don't reconcile the idea of doing an exercise, doing something for my health is required.
Just as important.
Just as important as having that contract reviewed by a competent individual. Yes. Those type of things. It's that balance. I'm loving our discussion, by the way, which is great. I've got another concept we talk about. I have to ask you about. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever heard of the term imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome. What are you referring to?
I'm referring to one's lack of confidence in themselves to do a task that they've been successful in doing time and time again before, but they still have a sense of anxiety and question as to whether or not they can do the task the right way, or are they worthy enough to be in the field and the area that they're in light of their predisposition. So have you ever
it's interesting that you bring that concept up. We, being neurosurgeons, have gone through training to not feel that way. You can't, as a brain surgeon, as a neurosurgeon, feel that way. You cannot question your decision. You cannot question the next move with your hand. You cannot question the decision that you made, whether you should operate on this patient or not. So in my opinion, the surgeon, the neurosurgeon, or any type of acute care surgeon that questions, like, am I going to get through this okay, they shouldn't do that field. We go through 10,000 hours of training, and to become an expert, you can't question yourself. You have to know, and that's really important to understand. My field may be different than what others do. Maybe it's okay to question or have that anxiety going in. You do not want your surgeon to be anxious about doing your surgery.
Oh, absolutely.
It doesn't mean I don't respect the surgery. It doesn't mean that I don't go through, just like, the comparison of what we do is always to a professional athlete, right? Before their Super Bowl game, that before a competition. They are going through their mind about how that football they're going to throw, whatever they're doing as an athlete, because they've spent 10,000 hours becoming a professional athlete. Same concept. You can't doubt yourself. So for me, it doesn't play a role in what I do, because when I do it confidently, and I know I can do it.
I think what's crucial to that I've talked about before is the concept of preparation.
Yes.
And the redundancy of the tasks that you're going to approach, and you validated it.
Yes,
over and over again.
Yeah.
Lack of preparation, of course, is going to create that fear or the anxiety. But I still feel that even though you've done it a million times, and it makes sense, I think, in that specific circumstance that you don't want somebody to go, oh, I don't know should I do this, or I don't think that I'm competent. Should I have this scalpel in my hand and do this other thing?
And you'll be surprised. There are doctors who come in with that. I'm like, they have this, and that's for us a big red flag. Would not be a good member of my team.
I think human nature, though, I think a lot of people struggle with that idea. I personally have dealt with it at times. The way I use it a little bit as a beacon of humility and insurance of, I kind of use it as a fuel in that I want to make sure I'm prepared. Yeah. Like, and you would call it anxiety. If I'm getting ready for a trial or I'm getting ready for something that I have to do, I need to make sure I've dotted all my I's and crossed my T's. Preparation is key, even though I've done it a million times before.
Right.
Did I get this? Did I get that? So from that perspective, I think in a way it guards against arrogance.
Yeah.
In part, in creating that humility, just to ensure that an individual doesn't think they know it all. So I could see it in your specific area. You don't want an individual who
doubts themselves. But you do want an individual who is prepared and may run practice trials or practice drills or whatever they do to be prepared. That's a little bit different than, doubting themselves, but rather being over-prepared. Some people over-prepare for something, I had co-residents who, we may go into a surgery and their hands are shaking because they're scared. Listen, they have to do that for 5 years until they're not scared anymore.
Exactly.
And when that surgery first comes up, that first surgery they do by themselves as an attending, when there isn't someone watching their back, they're also scared, right? And it's okay to be scared, but you need to know what your limits are, right? There are surgeries that you have limits to. You're like, okay, I can't do it all, but I know I can do this. But because I don't have that safety net anymore, not a resident anymore, I'm going to prepare. So a few days before surgery, you're rereading things you already know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're watching videos you've already know, surgeries that you videotaped yourself doing before, you're watching again. That's the preparation, maybe what you're referring to, rather than an anxiety. It's more of a hyper preparedness.
Sure. And of course, obviously, the surgeries themselves, that's a risk in and of itself, no matter what. And so you just have to be prepared to deal with it.
And the outcomes are unknown. You don't know what's going to happen. I've had patients wake up in the middle of surgery because anesthesia had changed and they stopped the drip. I wasn't prepared for that, right? So we have to be able to be dynamic as well.
Have you noticed anything in individuals that you hire on this, like surgeons? Was there any theme of personality traits they may have had that you saw ahead of time that you can look back in retrospect and say, oh, that was a red flag. If I had known, about that particular trait early on, that validated the fact that they fell under pressure, or that is anything you can think of?
Well, there was one that we passed on that we offered employment to, that before she started as a surgeon, we found out that she was a complete fraud, had never gone to med school, had never done any of that, but came and claimed all of these things. We found that obviously she wouldn't have been able to join because the credentialing thing would have failed. But we had started the credentialing because she checked off all the boxes. But then when we started looking at the next layer, we saw that she was a absolute, she was not right in her head. Not because she never went to med school. She doesn't have a medical degree. She's a person who just thought they could be a brain surgeon with on-the-job training, which I don't know what, you got to be a special person to think that.
Yeah, I think.
But the one that we actually did hire, and I was surprised that they folded under pressure, was one of our co-residents, one of our earlier on surgeons that joined us. Armin and I there's a doctor, a surgeon that we'd worked with as a resident many years ago and seemed okay. But in the real world, when you don't have that safety net, he was not okay. And when the pressure really came up, we started hearing from the nurse practitioners, the PAs, hey, there's something wrong here. And then we had to start looking at videotapes, and we saw behavior that was just not normal, right? So it didn't work out for him, but just behavior that people understood. You'd be surprised. Yeah, the things that they were doing in the office that was just what?
So it wasn't anything that was readily observable to you on the front end.
No.
It came out after the fact.
It came out because of COVID. He was fine. Everything was going in the right direction. And as soon as that isolation concept started happening, that was early in COVID when the isolation started happening, where that, and I think he was from Jersey, and some of his family members died from COVID, and that kind of triggered something in him, and his career is very different now. I won't say his name because he's still in the community, but it's a very, it's different. His life path has changed 180 degrees.
Wow.
Yeah.
If there was one thing you could share with our audience about a neurosurgeon in general that they may have to interact with or deal with that would be something unknown to them that they wouldn't ordinarily know about, what would that be that you could share with the audience?
That's a tough question. I mean, they're people too, right? So they're not gods, they're not superheroes. A lot of times we get these students and people who come up and they want to meet a brain surgeon, right? Or we take them into brain surgery so they can watch brain surgery, they see the brain for the first time. Anyone can, I tell patients, I tell certain people, friends at least, that anyone can be a brain surgeon. We can teach a monkey how to do brain surgery, and they all laugh about it. The reality is, anyone can do it as long as they commit that 10,000 hours, that 7 years of commitment. You can do it. You yourself can be a neurosurgeon, 7 plus 4,
well,
11 years from now.
Well, no, I think, there's where humility kicks in. You see, I think that you think anybody can do it, okay? But obviously that's not the case with 3,500 in the country.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that in general.
It's just the commitment to doing it, and it's just another job for us, but a job that took a lot of preparation, a lot of training.
Yeah. I know we're finishing up here, and it's been great. I'm really enjoying it. I think we talked offline. I don't know if we were on tape, but one of the topics that came up, and it came up at dinner, was the actual approach to neurosurgery from a technology perspective.
Yeah.
And you shared with me that for whatever reason in the industry, there's a lack of embracing change in approaches, whether it be surgical or technological.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that what people don't realize is, and they see this in other aspects of their life, meaning technologies taking over, AI, things of that nature. In the field of surgery and neurosurgery or medicine in general, there is a competing concept of the payer. Whether that's an insurance company, whether that's a facility like a hospital, that limits those new technologies because of cost. When you go to have your surgery, you're going to have the standard surgery your insurance is going to pay for, okay? And if you want something better, you really can't have that very easily, right? It either is a very expensive out-of-pocket expense, or your insurance company doesn't allow the facility to do it. Those are the contracts on the back end that limit that change. So not only there are technologies that are possible, but they're cost prohibitive in medicine.
So unbeknownst to the patient.
At all. The patients don't understand. They think a surgery is a surgery. If I put a screw in your back, it's the same screw everyone gets. Well, no, there are different types of screws. There are different kinds of instrumentation or technologies that I can use that healing may be better, or biologics, for example. When bones heal together, we put biologics for the bones to heal together. There are different tiers of biologics. This really works all the time, but you're not getting that because it's ultra expensive. You're getting the thing that works more than half of the time because the insurance company only will pay for this. That's what the patient doesn't understand. And what I'm seeing in medicine, especially in the cost arena being so high, is that there are now clinics, and part of our practice is transitioning to this is, hey, this is what you would get, and you're going to get this anywhere. But if you want this, here's how you can get this in a cost, in a doable way, in terms of finances.
So that would be something that the patient would have to offset and pay generally on their own, or could they
go look for it, or request it, or encourage their insurance company to pay for it. So there's that standardization of what they want to pay. The payer limits technological advancement in medicine. You have to understand that.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So for example, you can have a surgery that, if you embrace technology,
yes.
Let's just use an example, a back surgery that could take, with technology, 45 minutes versus 4 hours.
Yeah, 3 hours.
3 hours another way.
Yeah.
That the insurance company has decided we're going to go the lower tier.
Well, yes, either insurer or a payer or a facility. Yeah.
Or a facility. So those are the things that you're challenged with in your
daily
industry.
basis. On a daily basis.
Now, are you able to, because you have your own practice group and you have you're not doing, are you doing surgeries on your own facility, at your own facility at times?
We have facilities that we own, that we operate out of. So the patients have a little bit more leeway of what they can use and what they want. Whether, for example, some patients will come to us and they want stem cells, right? That may, insurance doesn't necessarily cover stem cells. Or they may want certain things that are considered maybe experimental by certain standards. You can integrate those things because, believe it or not, we have very educated patients. They're chemists and they're engineers and other doctors. I operate on other spine surgeons that come to me and we say, hey, this is possible. We just can't do it at this facility because they won't allow it, right? Man. And your insurance is going to pay for this, but here's how we can ask for them to pay for why. So understand that there are other forces that limit technology in medicine. Now, there's still industry that produce these things, like augmented reality surgery. That's something that we get approached about on a monthly basis, and its foundation, and it's right now starting, but it's not to a point where it can be adopted.
What is that specific for our listeners and viewers? What is that?
Like augmented reality surgery is when we put on a special augmenting. It's kind of like the Meta glasses, where in 3D reality, but through those glasses, not only do I see you laying on the table, I also see your CT scan and your MRI.
Okay.
Now, when I'm putting the drill on your spine, I see on the CT scan where that drill is in real time. Those kind of things, I think that's the future. Now, if the payer's going to pay for that, and we know they're not, because it's going in the opposite direction. They want to pay less and less and less.
Even though medical expenses are going up. They're reducing the efficacy, potentially the efficacy of procedures.
They are reducing themselves to the cheapest common denominator, whatever that is.
Whatever that may be.
And that's unfortunate. Now, there are insurers that are better than others, don't get me wrong. There are facilities that are in this city that are better than others in terms of embracing technology. And that was part of why we split off.
It validates.
Yeah.
It validates many respect of that.
Yeah, and we wanted to start our outcome because we wanted outcome driven. So if this thing has a good outcome, we're going to integrate it, and we're going to give the patient the option to integrate it. Whether that's at an ASC, whether that's at a micro hospital, whether that's at a real hospital, and what entity owns that hospital. This is a big changing environment in medicine. You'll see that there'll be multi-tier systems where the insurance company owns the hospital, owns the physician, owns the pharmacy. Now,
Wow.
what do? You're beholden by the insurance company, and that's already happening, by the way.
It reminds me of Rockefeller when they had to break up that whole setup is where
and
it's going
politics,
to.
yeah, and politics are very much involved in that. It's you gotta
Well, it even goes to the point of the equity groups.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about how these capital groups have bought up all the medical practices,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you've been approached,
Yes,
countless times,
many times
about
already.
trying to get in.
Yeah.
My understanding recently, locally, for people who may be listening or have any knowledge in the area can check it, but Florida Medical Group just got purchased. I think it's public knowledge that they got purchased by Orlando. I think it was Orlando Health.
Yes.
So I mean, in Orlando Health. I don't know the legalities as far as the ownership structure of Orlando Health, but I do know, at least in the medical aesthetic space, it's prevalent where equity groups acquire derm practices, acquire and set up medical spas all over the country.
Yes.
And I do know of, a lot of orthopedic groups that we deal with on the PI basis and stuff that get acquired by these entities.
Yes.
And they stay on for a couple of years. And my understanding and part of that is, I'll dummy it down, but you're dealing with equity groups making, monetary decisions trickle down to the patient, but they're not necessarily concerned about the patient. They're concerned about penetration. They're concerned about so many things that are different than
the business side.
Than your outcome
the
driven.
doctors
What you guys
concerned
are
about,
concerned about,
which is
and,
outcomes.
and patients need to be aware of it.
Yeah.
Let me go to one last topic before we finish up that you referenced, which I have embraced and a lot of people are afraid of, and that's AI.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
I
think it's great.
Tell me about it. Tell me about your thoughts about it.
I think obviously there are a lot of dangers to it if you look at it from a global perspective. But in terms of my field, looking at the microchiasm of what we use it in medicine for, it is percolating in medicine relatively quickly. Utilization of the simplest thing is ChatGPT. Yes, I think there are technologies that I'm interested in developing where AI-driven communications are converted into legal documents in the medical charts or health medical records. That's the future. The future is this conversation could be a clinic visit. There isn't a MA, a nurse practitioner, a scribe creating that medical document for you. This conversation happens naturally. The AI determines what's the subjective, what's the objective, what's the physical exam, what's the plan, based on our interactions alone. That's the future of medicine, at least clinically.
That's a great concept and an idea, and it's refreshing that you referenced that. And we're going to have a lot of haters and likers with regard to this concept and conversation. I implore people to embrace it because it's coming, whether you like it or not. Like the internet, it's coming. And wouldn't you rather know a little bit about it than just put your head in the sand? It's not the end-all answer.
No.
And there's going to be lazy people who think it is and use it as a shortcut. I use it in part if I need to create something. It helps me organize things a little better. But it doesn't take away my analytical rationale and what I have to do with it to do things. You have to find where it can apply to your particular area of expertise and allow it to help you make your job easier. Don't fight it, but also don't think it's the end-all answer and you can give up everything else.
Correct.
Because even in your example, there's still going to have to be somebody checking to ensuring that took place correctly, and the antiquation of whatever you're relying on it for. So I think it's fascinating. We're going to see things happen, and I could only imagine what's going to happen with our generations.
And it's going to happen
beyond.
fast, much faster than it happened before. It took many years, many decades for integration of robotics in surgery. I think the integration of AI in medicine is going to be much faster than integration of robotics in surgery, for example.
Is there any, there probably is. I don't know if you know that. Is there any use of it now with regard to alternative diagnosis when in real time?
There's a lot of red tape around that. The reality is that it does a very good job. In fact, much better job than a tired doctor that hasn't slept and they're on their shift work and they may have missed something. So back to embracing it, you should embrace it because it can decrease medical errors, right? Yes, it can compete for an ER doctor's job. Yes, it can, compete for some internal medicine jobs or even certain aspects of anesthesia. But the reality is, if you embrace it, you can grow with it. If you don't embrace it, it can replace you, because what you don't want as a doctor is you want to do the right thing. Doctors go through algorithms. Medicine or surgery, we go through if A, then B, if not B, then C. That's what we do. We're in fact computers, right? And AI can do that faster. But what it doesn't have is the empathy, the compassion, and the final decision-making, right? We may say to the decision-making that this patient may not have meaningful survival in the field of neurosurgery. That doesn't mean we withdraw care. That means that we just relay that to the family, and maybe that patient may go to a nursing home. But that empathy and that final decision-making is still a human trait.
Sure. And the actual procedure itself too.
Yes.
So yeah, for sure. Well, I had a blast.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was fun.
We can go on. We could probably pick a topic and stay on it for like an hour or so. We didn't even get into your wine, the wine that you have that I heard you have, and all the other things.
Yeah.
But I just want to thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
I'm so glad you came on. We had a good time with it. And for anybody who's listening or watching, think twice when you have to meet with your doctor again, recognizing all the challenges that they face, but also remember they're human too.
They're human too.
And they'll be there for you.
Yeah.
Thanks again. Thank you all for listening and watching. And remember, keep it pro-to-pro. That's all for today's episode of Pro-to-Pro. I hope you enjoyed hearing from our guest and gained some valuable insights into the world of entrepreneurship. Like and subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes, and don't forget to follow us on social media. Thanks for watching and listening, and remember to keep it pro-to-pro.